I just need someone to co-sign by tomorrow morning." Odessa Hume whispered into her phone, her back pressed against the filing cabinet in the back office of Devane's, her voice barely above a trembling thread. "Anyone. I'm not asking for money, Bet. I'm asking for a name on a piece of paper, someone the bank won't laugh at." Her sister's voice came back muffled and worried. $40,000, Odessa continued, pressing one hand flat against the cold metal as if it could hold her upright. "That's what they need before Friday to keep Mom's surgery scheduled. If the slot goes to someone else, she waits another 6 months." She closed her eyes. She doesn't have 6 months. She ended the call, turned to wipe her face with the sleeve of her cardigan, and walked directly into the solid wall of Arlo Devane's chest. Neither of them spoke. Arlo Devane was not, by any reasonable definition, a man people ran into accidentally and survived intact. He was 6'2" of controlled stillness, with dark eyes that had witnessed enough of the world's worst arrangements to make entire rooms go quiet when he entered them. He owned Devane's, the building Devane's occupied, 4 blocks of the surrounding neighborhood, and the continued silence of at least 2 city officials who preferred to remain unnamed. He was also, apparently, standing in the hallway long enough to have heard everything. Odessa looked up at him. He looked back at her without expression. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'll get back to the ledgers." He stepped aside to let her pass. Odessa spent the rest of the evening being extremely precise about the accounts payable column, and refusing with considerable effort to think about what had just happened. The next morning she arrived at First Meridian Bank at 9 o'clock sharp. The loan officer, a man named Dougal Ferris, who had the unfortunate professional habit of sighing before every single sentence, was already at his desk. So was Arlo Devane. He was sitting in the chair across from Ferris, with his coat still buttoned, one ankle crossed over his knee, looking less like a man who had traveled to a bank in the Northside District at 9 in the morning, and more like a man who had simply decided the bank would find him here. Ferris was sweating slightly. Odessa stopped in the doorway. Arlo glanced at her. "You're 2 minutes late." "This is my appointment," she said carefully. "I know." Ferris cleared his throat. "Mr. Devane has already reviewed." "I can see that." Odessa stepped into the office. She looked at Arlo with an expression that was working very hard to remain professional. "What are you doing here?" "You needed a co-signer." The simplicity of it was almost offensive. He said it the way he said everything, as if he had noticed a gap in a spreadsheet and simply corrected it. "I didn't ask you," she said. "No. You asked your sister." He picked up the pen Ferris had set across the signature line. She said no. Odessa opened her mouth, closed it. Ferris looked between them with the careful neutrality of a man who had decided his fastest route to surviving the next 10 minutes was absolute non-participation. Arlo signed the paperwork, set down the pen, passed the form to Odessa and waited. The surgery was scheduled for Thursday. Odessa told herself, walking back to her car, that this was a professional matter. Her employer had extended a professional courtesy. She would repay it through excellent ledger work and reliable punctuality, and never, under any circumstances, allowing herself to think too carefully about how his voice had landed on the words "you needed a co-signer," as though it were the most reasonable thing in the world, and she had simply been slow to see it. She thought about it the entire drive back anyway. 2 days later, Arlo appeared at Mercy General. Odessa was in the cardiac unit waiting area, working through a bag of crackers she'd found in her purse from approximately 3 weeks prior. When she looked up and found him standing near the nurse's station, holding a paper bag from the deli on Clement Street. Odessa was a woman who had spent most of her adult life learning to take up precisely the amount of space she was allocated and no more. She was 29, soft-figured and deliberate, and she had 3 years of practice making herself nearly invisible inside Arlo Devane's world. Standing in a hospital hallway watching him hand soup to a nurse and ask for room 412, she understood for the first time that he had noticed her anyway. "How did you know she likes matzo ball soup?" she asked when he reached her. "I," asked Bet. "You have my sister's number. She called the restaurant to thank me for the cosign." He sat down in the chair beside her, not close enough to crowd her, but close enough that she could feel the particular calm he carried the way other men carried a watch or a title. "She also told me your mother likes word puzzles, hates roses, and once drove 40 minutes to return a library book that was 3 days overdue." Odessa stared at him. "She told you all of that?" "She told me considerably more. I stopped listening around the time she began describing your 3rd grade science fair entry." Despite everything, a sound escaped Odessa that was almost a laugh. Lillian Hume was 63 years old, had survived a triple bypass and 2 decades of single parenthood, and she had the eyes of someone who had long ago stopped being fooled by anything except her own hope, which she maintained carefully and on purpose. When Arlo walked in behind Odessa, Lillian looked up from her word puzzle book and went very still. "Mama," Odessa said, "this is my..." "Employer," Arlo said. "Employer," Odessa agreed, a fraction too quickly. Lillian looked at Arlo Devane for a long, deliberate moment. Then she looked at her daughter. Then she looked back at Arlo. "You don't look like an accountant," she said. "No, ma'am. Des works with accountants. She is the accountant." "Then, what are you?" A brief pause. "I'm the one who pays her." Lillian's gaze moved to Odessa. "He's very handsome for a man who only pays you." "Mama, I'm just observing." She opened the paper bag, found the soup, and looked unexpectedly pleased. "Matzo ball. How did he know?" "Bet," they said at the same moment. Lillian smiled slowly. "Sit down," she told Arlo. "You can tell me about yourself. Des never tells me anything useful about anyone." What followed was 20 minutes of Lillian Hume, conducting the sort of cheerful and thorough interrogation she applied to everyone within conversational range. She asked Arlo where he grew up, what he did before the restaurant business, and whether he took his coffee with or without cream. He answered the first, deflected the second with practiced ease, and said black, no sugar for the third. "He's very good at not answering things," Lillian observed when Arlo stepped out to take a call. "He runs several businesses," Odessa said. "Is that what they're calling it?" Lillian set down her spoon. "Des, don't. I've been in this bed for 3 days. I still have all my faculties." "I know. He is not just your employer. He is exactly my employer." Lillian regarded her with the expression she reserved for moments when Odessa was being deliberately obtuse about something everyone else could see clearly. "Professional men send fruit baskets," she said simply. "This one brought soup and remembered, I don't like the noodles soft." She returned to her puzzle. He was paying attention. Odessa ate a cracker and said nothing, because there was nothing particularly useful to say. When Arlo returned, Lillian beamed at him. "Come back Thursday," she said. "I'll be more interesting after surgery." He nodded. "I'll bring better crackers." Lillian pointed at him. "I already like you more than the last one." Odessa pressed both hands over her face. By the following week, the story had moved through Devane's the way all stories did. Through the kitchen first, then the bar, then the hosting station, and finally to the back office where Odessa kept her ledgers and her composure and, increasingly, her growing dread. She knew because Rowena Tatch, who managed the front of house with the quiet authority of a woman who considered herself the final word on how things should be, started routing Odessa through early shifts and keeping her away from the main floor. On Wednesday, Rowena appeared in the office doorway. "Astrid is coming in Thursday evening," she said, delivering it the way people delivered information meant to function as a warning. Odessa did not look up from payroll. Astrid Cole, Mr. Devane's fiancée. Odessa had seen Astrid Cole exactly twice. She was precise in the way of things built to be displayed rather than used. Beautiful by careful architecture, expensive in a way that was not accidental. She was also, Odessa had noted with her usual quiet attention, the kind of woman who understood the exact difference between an employee and a threat. "Thank you," Odessa said. Rowena lingered. "Some people," she said, "mistake professional access for personal invitation." "I understand my job, Rowena." Rowena left. Odessa stared at payroll for several seconds before she realized her hands had gone entirely still. Astrid Cole did not come through the dining room. She came through the back, which told Odessa everything about the nature of the visit. She found Odessa in the stairwell between the kitchen and the second floor, carrying a binder of vendor contracts. Astrid was in camel-colored wool and heels that cost more than Odessa's monthly car payment. And she looked at Odessa the way people look at furniture they are about to rearrange. "You're the bookkeeper," Astrid said. "I am. I heard about the loan." Odessa kept her expression level. "I don't discuss Mr. Devane's business decisions. His name is on $40,000 of personal debt attached to your mother's surgery." Astrid tilted her head precisely. "I'd call that as much my business as his." "With respect," Odessa said, "it isn't." "He co-signed a personal loan for an employee." Astrid's voice dropped, smooth and deliberate. "And then he visited her mother in the hospital, twice." A pause. "Do you understand how that looks?" "I see that he was generous," Odessa said, "and I have never given anyone in this building a reason to question my professionalism." "No," Astrid conceded it cleanly, "but you've given Arlo a reason to question his judgment." She let the silence work for her. "I'm not saying this to be unkind. I'm saying it because you seem like a practical woman who understands how things actually operate." Another pause, placed with precision. "Think about what happens to your mother's loan if Arlo's name becomes a liability." It was a well-constructed threat. Odessa gave her that. For 3 full seconds, she stood on the landing and breathed. Then she said, "His name is on a personal loan, not a criminal filing. The bank cares about his credit rating and his asset column, both of which I've reviewed every quarter for 3 years." She held Astrid's gaze. "His credit rating is excellent. His assets are substantial. If you're planning to use my mother's surgery as leverage, I'd recommend a sharper argument first." Astrid's expression shifted by a fraction. From the base of the stairwell came the sound of a door opening. Arlo was standing at the bottom of the stairs. His coat was off, which meant he'd been in the building long enough to have heard most of it. He looked up at both of them with the particular stillness he carried, when he had already formed a complete picture of a situation and was simply deciding how to respond to it. Astrid recovered first. "Arlo, I heard, very quiet." Which was, Odessa had learned, considerably worse than if he had raised his voice. He looked at his fiancée for a long moment. "You used her mother's medical situation to apply pressure." I was explaining the optics. "You told her my name becomes a liability." He took one step up, not toward Odessa, but in the way of a man placing himself inside a conversation on purpose. "Her name is Odessa. She has worked in this building for 3 years without a single complaint filed, including from you." Another step, and you walked into my stairwell to remind her that she can be discarded. Astrid's chin lifted. "I was protecting your interests." "No," Arlo said. "You were protecting your comfort." The stairwell went entirely silent. Astrid looked at Odessa. Something crossed her face. Not apology, but the recognition that she had miscalculated in front of someone who would remember it precisely. She looked back at Arlo. "This is a conversation we should have privately." We can, he waited, after you apologize. Arlo. To her. For threatening a woman with a sick mother. The silence stretched. Astrid did not apologize. She descended the remaining stairs, passed Arlo without looking at him, and walked through the door at the bottom. Her heels crossed the kitchen floor and did not return. Arlo stood at the base of the stairs and looked up at Odessa. I didn't need you to do that, she said. I know. She waited. He didn't offer anything else. You're going to end your engagement, she said. It was already over. The way he said it left no room for argument. This only made it visible. She stood on the landing above him, holding her binder of vendor contracts, trying to understand what exactly was happening. Why does any of this matter to you? I run your numbers. Come down the stairs, Odessa, he said. She came down. He told her about his brother in the kitchen at 11:30, after everyone else had gone home. His name was Eli. He was 38 when he died. For the last 2 weeks of his life, he had been in a hospital room in the same city where Arlo ran his business and took his meetings and handled exactly the kind of arrangements that did not reschedule themselves. Arlo rescheduled one, just the one. He visited on a Sunday afternoon. Eli was awake and in moderate pain and deeply interested in relitigating an argument they'd had in 1999 about whether Arlo had deliberately lost a card game to spare Eli's feelings. Arlo denied it. Eli laughed. Arlo had a meeting on Monday. He went. Eli died Wednesday. The kitchen was very quiet when Arlo stopped speaking. You heard me on the phone, Odessa said slowly. Yes. And you recognized. Someone who knows time is running out. He looked at the counter and is too frightened to say it above a whisper. Odessa was quiet for a moment. So you co-signed a loan for a woman you barely know because she reminded you of a Sunday afternoon you didn't take. He didn't answer immediately. I went to the bank because of Eli, he said finally. I kept going to the hospital because you were there. The distinction landed somewhere specific in her chest and stayed. Arlo. He looked at her. I'm your bookkeeper, she said. But this time it came out differently, less like a boundary, more like a question she was asking herself. You are also, he said, the only person in this building who corrects my math directly to my face. She almost smiled. You make rounding errors when you're distracted. I know. It bothers me. It's the depreciation column. You've been doing it for 2 years. I assumed you corrected it without telling me. I correct it every quarter and leave a note in the margin. I've never read the margin notes. I know. The smile arrived before she could stop it. I assumed you were too intimidating to approach about arithmetic. Something shifted in his expression. Not much, just enough. You are not actually afraid of me. No, she agreed, but I was being practical. Men who own buildings don't generally want their bookkeepers pointing out their mistakes. This one does, he held her gaze, as it turns out. She told her mother the truth on Saturday morning. Lillian was in better spirits post-surgery, graduated from word puzzles to a crossword book of serious difficulty, and eating the specific crackers from the specific bakery Arlo had sent. A place Odessa had not previously known existed. When Odessa sat down in the chair beside the bed and said, Mama, I have to tell you something. Lillian set the crackers down. All right. Arlo isn't. Odessa searched for the least damaging arrangement of the sentence. He's my employer. He helped me because he overheard a phone call. He was being generous. That's the whole story. She looked at her hands. I'm sorry if it seemed like something it wasn't. I know Bet's been telling people. What's a 9-letter word for entirely predictable? Lillian asked. Mama, I'm asking sincerely. I'm trying to confess something. I'm aware. Lillian looked up from the grid. Des, I've been in this bed for 11 days. My heart had a disagreement with my aorta. My eyesight is fine. She set the book down. He brought matzo ball soup with no noodles, because I mentioned once, in passing, that the noodles go too soft. He remembered my coffee order after hearing it exactly one time. And when you were in the hallway, talking to the surgeon, he sat here and did not check his phone once. She folded her hands. A man that busy, sitting that still, next to a woman he only knows professionally. Odessa stared at her. You knew. I suspected from the soup. I confirmed when he came back the second time. Lillian picked up her crossword. A man being professionally courteous sends a fruit basket, baby. He doesn't find a bakery that doesn't deliver. Odessa sat back. The window behind her mother showed a grey November sky over the hospital parking lot. She had spent 3 years making herself small enough to move through Arlo Devaine's world without disturbing anything, and somehow he had noticed her anyway. With a precision she was only now beginning to understand, was not accidental. Lillian lowered the crossword book. I did not ask you to find someone before I went into surgery, she said. I know. I asked you to stop making yourself disappear. She reached out and took Odessa's hand. You've been doing it your whole life. Deciding in advance how much space you're allowed to take up and then being very careful not to exceed it. Her grip was firm. I did not raise you to negotiate with people's opinions of you. Odessa's throat tightened. You are not too much, Lillian said clearly. You are exactly the right amount. And anyone who needs you to be less loud, less present, less entirely yourself, is working with a room that's simply too small. She sat back against her pillows. That is all I have ever wanted you to understand. There was a soft knock. Both women looked toward the door. Arlo Devaine stood in the doorway, holding a small bunch of flowers. Not roses. Lillian had mentioned once that she found roses performative. These were sunflowers, the specific kind with brown centers rather than black, because Lillian had told Odessa once, years ago, that they reminded her of the summer she turned 20 when everything still felt like it had room to grow. Odessa had mentioned it to Arlo in passing 1 week ago without thinking. He had been paying attention. Lillian looked from the flowers to her daughter with an expression of complete and unrepentant satisfaction. Your mother texted me, Arlo said. Of course she did. Odessa turned to Lillian. You have his number. Bet gave it to me. Lillian was already adjusting herself to look more dignified against her pillows. Come in, Arlo. Don't stand in the door like you're waiting for permission. He came in. He handed Lillian the sunflowers. She held them in both hands and smiled at them in a way that made Odessa feel something inconveniently large move through her chest. Sit down, Lillian told them both. I want to watch the nature program and I don't want to feel guilty about ignoring you. Arlo sat in the chair on the opposite side of the bed. Odessa sat in hers. Lillian turned on a documentary about migration patterns and opened her crossword. At some point, Arlo looked across the bed at Odessa. She looked back. I would like to take you to dinner, he said quietly, under the sound of the television. Not as your employer. She considered it. Where? Wherever you choose. You own 4 restaurants. None of them are yours, he said. I'll go where you take me. There it was. Not an invitation to step up into his world, not an offer to lift her out of hers, but simply the offer of a door held open from the other side, and him standing there ready to walk through it on her terms. Odessa thought about 3 years of moving carefully through spaces that weren't built with her in mind, of keeping herself small enough to avoid objection, of deciding in advance that wanting things loudly was a risk she couldn't justify. She thought about what her mother had said. Exactly the right amount. There's a place on Linden, she said. Small tables, handwritten menus. The music is too loud on Fridays. Saturday, then. Saturday. He nodded. The same nod he used in contract negotiations, except that it wasn't, and she understood now what the difference felt like. Lillian, without raising her eyes from the crossword, said, 7 across is belonging. Mama. I'm helping. She circled the answer with her pencil. Someone has to. Arlo looked at Lillian, and something in his face went unguarded for just a moment. Briefly, quietly, the way a man looks at something he had not known he was missing until he found himself standing in front of it. Odessa thought about Eli, about a Sunday afternoon and a card game, and the arithmetic of things left too long undone. She thought that she would very much like to know what she had while she still had it. Months later, when Lillian Hume walked out of Mercy General on her own 2 feet, carrying a tote bag of word puzzle books and a clean bill of health, Odessa and Arlo were both waiting on the sidewalk beside the car. Lillian looked at them standing side by side and made a sound of pure, unhurried satisfaction. I have excellent instincts, she announced. You texted a man you'd met twice, Odessa said. And it worked. Lillian took Arlo's offered arm without ceremony. Don't borrow trouble from the method. He helped her into the car with the careful steadiness he gave to things he intended to keep safe. Odessa watched him and understood, with the particular clarity that arrives only after a long time of looking at something without seeing it, that she had stopped disappearing. She was, it turned out, exactly the right amount. And for the first time in longer than she could count, that felt less like something she had to defend, and more like something she simply got to be.